The rain fell in sheets across the cracked asphalt of the gas station parking lot as Marcus Reeves pulled his weathered pickup truck alongside pump number 3. Through the downpour, he spotted them, two small figures huddled beneath the flickering light of the convenience store awning, their matching pink backpacks soaked through, their faces drawn with worry. Something about those twin girls, no older than 10, tugged at his heart. What Marcus couldn't possibly know was that their father, Judge Richard Harmon, was the same man who had sentenced him 5 years ago, a decision that had changed the course of his life forever. If you're moved by stories of redemption, second chances, and the mysterious ways our lives intersect, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Marcus killed the engine and sat for a moment, watching the windshield wipers battle the relentless downpour. The forecast hadn't mentioned anything about a storm this severe, but then again, his ancient radio only caught signals when it felt like it. He pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders and prepared to make a dash for the store. That's when he noticed them again, two little girls with identical blonde braids, standing side by side beneath the store's awning. They looked lost, worried, and completely alone. Marcus glanced at his watch. Nearly 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. What were two young children doing out by themselves at this hour, especially in this weather? He hesitated. People tended to look at him with suspicion, a tall, broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and a face that rarely smiled. The years had been hard on him, and it showed. But something about those girls' vulnerability overrode his usual caution. Marcus stepped out into the rain and jogged toward the store, pulling his hood up against the downpour. "You two okay?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. The girls looked up at him with identical blue eyes, a mixture of fear and hope in their expressions. "Our dad was supposed to pick us up from piano lessons," one of them said, her voice barely audible above the rain. "But he never came, and Mrs. Peterson had to leave, so she dropped us here because it was on her way home. We tried calling him," the other twin added, "but his phone keeps going to voicemail." Marcus frowned. "You've been waiting here long?" "Almost an hour," the first girl replied, her lower lip trembling slightly. Marcus ran a hand over his stubbled chin. He couldn't just leave them here. The store would be closing soon, and the storm was only getting worse. "I'm Marcus," he said gently. "What are your names?" "I'm Emma," said the first twin. "And I'm Olivia," added her sister. "Do you know your dad's number? Maybe we could try calling him again." Emma nodded and recited a phone number. Marcus pulled out his old flip phone and dialed, but as the girls had said, it went straight to voicemail. "Hello, this is Richard Harmon. I'm unavailable at the moment." Marcus froze at the sound of the voice. Judge Richard Harmon. The name hit him like a physical blow. 5 years ago, that man had sentenced him to 3 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. 3 years that cost him his marriage, his relationship with his own daughter, and nearly his will to live. He ended the call without leaving a message, his mind racing. These were Judge Harmon's daughters. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. "No answer," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Do you know anyone else we could call?" "Your mom, maybe?" The twins exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. "Our mom died 2 years ago," Olivia said quietly. "It's just us and Dad now." Marcus felt a pang in his chest. Despite everything, he couldn't help but feel sympathy. He knew all too well the hollow space left by loss. "What about neighbors or other family?" "Our aunt lives in Chicago," Emma offered. "And our neighbors are on vacation." Marcus looked at his watch again, then at the darkening sky. The ethical thing would be to call the police, but his experiences with law enforcement had left him wary. Besides, in this small town, the police station closed at 8 p.m. on weekdays, with emergency calls routed to the county sheriff's office 30 miles away. "Listen," he said finally. "I know you don't know me, but I can't leave you two out here in this storm. There's a diner about 10 minutes from here that stays open late. We could go there, get you something warm to drink, and keep trying to reach your dad. What do you think?" The twins looked at each other again, having one of those silent conversations that only siblings, especially twins, seemed capable of. "Mrs. Peterson says we shouldn't go with strangers," Emma said cautiously. "That's very smart," Marcus agreed. "How about this? You can use my phone to call your dad again, and this time leave a message telling him exactly where you're going and who you're with. You can describe me and my truck. That way, he'll know where to find you." The girls considered this, then nodded. Marcus handed Emma his phone, and she left a detailed message, describing Marcus as a tall man with brown hair and a blue truck, who was taking them to the diner with the big coffee cup sign. As they walked to his truck, Marcus felt a strange mixture of emotions. Part of him wanted to tell these girls exactly who he was, a man whose life had been derailed by their father's gavel. But looking at their innocent faces, he couldn't bring himself to shatter their world. Whatever his feelings toward Judge Harmon, these children were blameless. The drive to the diner was quiet, save for the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the occasional rumble of thunder. In his rearview mirror, Marcus could see the twins huddled together in the back seat, their small hands clasped tightly. "My daughter used to love thunderstorms," he said, trying to ease the tension. "She said it was like the sky was having a conversation with the earth." "You have a daughter?" Olivia asked, perking up slightly. Marcus nodded, his throat tightening. "Lily. She's 12 now. Does she live with you?" Emma asked. "No," Marcus replied softly. "She lives with her mom in Arizona. I don't get to see her much these days." "That's sad," Olivia said with the straightforward empathy of a child. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "It is." The neon sign of the Midnight Diner came into view, a beacon in the stormy night. The coffee cup on the sign blinked rhythmically, casting a warm glow on the rain-slicked parking lot. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. A tired-looking waitress named Doris showed them to a booth by the window, eyeing Marcus with a mixture of recognition and wariness. He'd been coming here for late-night coffee since his release, but always alone. "Hot chocolates for the girls," Marcus ordered. "And coffee for me, please." As Doris walked away, he tried Richard's number again. Still no answer. "Your dad, is he usually reliable about picking you up?" Marcus asked carefully. The twins exchanged another look. "He used to be," Emma said. "But ever since Mom died, he's been different. He works a lot," Olivia added. "Sometimes he forgets things." Marcus nodded, understanding more than they knew. Grief could consume a person, reshape them into someone unrecognizable even to themselves. "What does your dad do?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "He's a judge," Emma said, a note of pride in her voice despite everything. "He helps make sure bad people get punished and good people get justice." Marcus felt a bitter laugh rise in his throat but swallowed it down. Justice. Such a simple word for such a complicated concept. "That's an important job," he managed to say. Their hot chocolates arrived, topped with whipped cream and chocolate sprinkles. The simple pleasure of the treat seemed to lift the girls' spirits, and they began to talk more freely. They told him about their school, their piano lessons, and their cat named Mozart who could open doors by himself. Marcus found himself smiling despite everything. They were good kids, bright, polite, and resilient in the face of loss. Whatever his feelings toward their father, he couldn't help but admire them. An hour passed, then another. They tried Richard's number every 15 minutes, but still no answer. The twins' initial worry was evolving into fear. What if something bad happened to him? Olivia whispered to her sister, but loud enough for Marcus to hear. "I'm sure he's fine," Marcus reassured them, though he wasn't sure at all. Maybe his phone died, or he got caught up at work. Just as he was considering their dwindling options, the diner would be closing at midnight, the bell above the door jingled. A man rushed in, soaking wet and wild-eyed with panic. Judge Richard Harmon looked exactly as Marcus remembered him, though perhaps with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. He spotted his daughters and nearly collapsed with relief. "Emma! Olivia!" he cried, rushing to their booth. The twins leapt from their seats and threw themselves into their father's arms. "Daddy!" Marcus sat very still, watching the reunion with a strange detachment. 5 years ago, this man had looked down at him from the bench with cold, judgmental eyes. Now, he was just a father embracing his children, his vulnerability on full display. After a moment, Richard looked up and noticed Marcus for the first time. There was no recognition in his eyes, just gratitude. "Thank you," he said fervently. "Thank you for looking after my girls." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "My phone died, and then my car broke down on Route 16, Richard explained, still holding his daughters close. "I had to walk 3 miles in this storm to find a gas station with a working phone. I've been trying to reach them for hours." "We left you a message, Dad," Emma said. "Telling you where we were." "My voicemail isn't working properly," Richard said, shaking his head. "I've been meaning to get a new phone." He trailed off, seeming to realize how inadequate the excuse sounded. Marcus could see the guilt in the judge's eyes, not just for tonight, but for a pattern of neglect that had been building since his wife's death. He recognized that look all too well, he'd seen it in his own mirror countless times. "Girls, why don't you go wash up before we head home?" Richard suggested, and the twins reluctantly detached themselves from their father and headed toward the restrooms. Once they were out of earshot, Richard turned to Marcus, extending his hand. "I don't know how to thank you properly. I'm Richard Harmon." Marcus hesitated, then shook the offered hand. "Marcus Reeves." For a moment, there was no reaction. Then, slowly, recognition dawned in Richard's eyes. His hand went slack in Marcus's grip. "Reeves," he repeated. "The construction site theft case. 5 years ago." 3-year sentence, Marcus confirmed quietly. "For something I didn't do." Richard sank into the booth across from him, his face ashen. "I remember." The evidence seemed conclusive at the time. "It was fabricated," Marcus said, keeping his voice level. "My foreman needed a scapegoat. But you didn't want to hear that." Richard looked down at his hands. "There was a lot going on in my life then. My wife had just been diagnosed with cancer. I was distracted. Not that that's an excuse." "No," Marcus agreed. "It's not." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the clinking of dishes from the kitchen. 2 years after my sentencing, my foreman was caught doing the same thing at another site, Marcus finally said. He confessed to framing me. By then, I'd already served most of my time. My wife had divorced me. My daughter barely knew me anymore. Richard's face was a mask of shame. "I didn't know." "Why would you?" Marcus asked. "Once you bring down the gavel, we're just case numbers to you." Richard flinched at the truth of it. "I'm sorry," he said, the word sounding hollow even to his own ears. "For what it's worth." Marcus looked out the window at the rain, still falling steadily. "You know what the ironic thing is? When I saw your girls standing there alone, I didn't hesitate to help them. Not for a second. Even after I realized who they were, who you were, I couldn't just leave them." "Why?" Richard asked, genuinely puzzled. Marcus turned back to him. "Because that's who I am. That's who I've always been. Not the thief you decided I was in your courtroom." Before Richard could respond, the twins returned, their faces freshly washed, their spirits visibly lifted now that their father was here. "Can Marcus come have dinner with us sometime?" Olivia asked innocently. "He told us about his daughter Lily. Maybe she could visit and play with us." Richard looked at Marcus, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. "That would be nice," he said carefully. "If Marcus is willing." Marcus felt the weight of the moment, the strange intersection of past and present, of hurt and healing. He looked at the hopeful faces of the twins, then at their father, a man who had once held power over his fate and was now, in some small way, at his mercy. "I'd like that," he said finally. "But only if your dad and I can have a longer conversation first." Richard nodded, understanding the unspoken terms. "I think that's more than fair." As they prepared to leave, Richard insisted on paying Marcus's bill along with their own. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and the night sky was beginning to clear, revealing patches of stars between the clouds. "Our house isn't far from here," Richard said as they stood in the parking lot. "If you'd like to follow us, we could have that conversation tonight." Marcus considered the offer. Part of him wanted to go home, to process everything that had happened. But another part recognized the rare opportunity before him, not just for confrontation or even closure, but for something he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years, the possibility of redemption, not for himself, but for the system that had failed him. "Lead the way," he said. As he followed the judge's car through the quiet streets of the town, Marcus thought about the strange turns life could take. 5 years ago, he had stood before Richard Harmon, powerless and voiceless. Tonight, he had saved the man's daughters and earned a chance to be truly heard. He didn't know what would come of their conversation, or if anything could truly make up for what he had lost. But for the first time in years, Marcus felt something like hope stirring in his chest, a fragile, tentative feeling, but real nonetheless. Sometimes, he thought, watching the taillights of Richard's car guide him through the darkness, justice takes the longest, most unexpected routes to find its way home. The Harmon house was a modest 2-story colonial on Maple Street, with a well-kept lawn and a basketball hoop mounted above the garage. It wasn't the grand mansion Marcus had imagined a judge would live in, but rather a family home with visible signs of both care and neglect, much like its owner. Inside, the evidence of Richard's struggle as a single father was apparent. Clean dishes were stacked haphazardly on the counter, waiting to be put away. A basket of unfolded laundry sat at the foot of the stairs. School projects and piano books were scattered across the dining room table. "Sorry about the mess," Richard said, sounding genuinely embarrassed. "We weren't expecting company." "It looks like a home," Marcus replied simply. The twins, despite the late hour and their ordeal, were reluctant to go to bed. The excitement of having a visitor, and the lingering anxiety from their abandonment, made them clingy and talkative. "Girls, it's way past your bedtime," Richard said firmly but gently. "Marcus and I need to talk about some grown-up things. Will you still be here when we wake up?" Emma asked Marcus, her eyes wide with hope. The question caught him off guard. "No, sweetheart. I'll have to go home tonight. But maybe I'll see you again soon." This seemed to satisfy them, and after extracting promises from both adults that this would indeed happen, they finally allowed themselves to be tucked in. When Richard returned to the living room, he was carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. "I don't know if you drink," he said, setting the glasses down on the coffee table. "But I could use one after tonight." "I don't," Marcus said. "Not anymore. Water is fine." Richard nodded and disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a glass of water for Marcus and a modest pour of whiskey for himself. He sat in an armchair across from where Marcus had settled on the couch. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway marked the passing seconds. "I looked into your case," Richard finally said. "After the truth came out about your foreman.